use this. So we're going to continue talking about reading and writing to a file. So we already know how to read a file using the scanner class. It was actually really simple. It's actually my preferred way of reading a file. There are some additional classes that we can use to read files and to write to files. And two of the classes that we can use to read a file is the file reader and the buffered reader. The book doesn't mention these classes, but we're going to talk about them. Both of these classes are in the java.io package, and both of these classes can be used in conjunction to read a file. Now, the disadvantage of using the file reader and the buffered reader is that neither of these classes implement the iterator interface, where the scanner class did. Now, if we wanted to write to a file, there are two classes called Filereader and buffered writer, and those are the two classes that we're going to use to write to a file. These two classes are also part of the java.io package. So let's go ahead and use these classes to read and write to a file. So I created a project called Read and Write to a File. I went ahead and created a driver class. So the first thing I want to do is I want to demonstrate reading a file using the scanner class. As you can see, I already have a file called test.txt. It has 3 lines. So I'm going to read this file using the scanner class. So the first thing I want to do is I want to declare my scanner object, and I want to pass in the file that I want to read. Now this is red, so I'm going to hover over this and import the class. So file is in the java.io package. You can also see that there's a red squiggly line under scanner. It wants me to handle an exception. The file not found exception is going to get thrown if this file does not exist. Now currently, this file does not actually exist. I wanted to demonstrate what would happen if the file doesn't exist. I misnamed it. It's text.txt. So instead of adding the exception signature to the main method, I'm going to go ahead and use a try catch. So here's how I'm handling the exception. I wrap it with a try catch. We'll learn about try catches in chapter 11. I'm catching the file not found exception. I'm printing out this line, and then I'm printing out the message of the exception. So let's go ahead and run this program. And here's my result. So text.txt was not found. So instead of executing what's inside of the try, we went here to the catch and we executed these statements. So I'm going to go ahead and correct my program and rerun it. As you can see, I did not get the exception. I don't have any output, but we know it didn't throw that exception. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this. I'm going to just read each line of this file and print it out to the screen. So here's what I have. I corrected my file name. Then I go into a while loop. Now remember, the scanner class implements the iterator interface, so I can call has next line. And while it has the next line, I'm going to print out each line of the file. Let's go ahead and run this program. And here's my result. So now what I want to do is I want to make a menu option to where I give the user the option to read the file using the scanner class, read the file using the file reader and the buffered reader, and write to the file using the file writer and the buffered writer. So I'm going to go ahead and set up a menu like I've done before in the past. I'm going to move all this to its own method. So I created a method called read file using scanner, and I simply just copied what I had before into this method. So what I plan to do is make a menu, and the user is going to select the option to read the file using the scanner class. Okay, so this is what I have. I went ahead and set up another scanner. I named it keyboard because it's listening to the keyboard. I made a char named opt, and then I go into a do loop. Now, the do loop is being controlled by the opt. As long as opt is not Q, they're going to stay inside of this do loop. The first thing I do is I print out a menu to the user. I tell them to enter an S for the scanner class, R to use the file reader and a buffered reader, W to use the file writer and the buffered writer, and Q to quit the program. Then the next thing I do is this. This is something different. I haven't done this before in an example. So basically what I'm doing is I'm just ignoring any blank lines or empty lines. So I scan the next line and I trim it. And if the length is less than 1, then I keep scanning the keyboard. And while the line length is less than 1, I'll keep scanning the next line. So you're going to stay in this loop until they enter in a valid line. Then at that point, I take my input string, take it to uppercase, and then grab the first character at charge 0. Then I go into my switch. Inside of my switch, depending on what they entered, I do different things. The only thing that I have working right now is using the scanner class, and we'll stay inside of this loop until they enter in a queue. And here's the only other method I have, which is the file read using scanner, and it simply just reads the file using the scanner class. So let's go ahead and test this program. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that I can leave this loop. So I'm going to enter in a queue, and the program ended. I'm going to run again, but this time I want to enter in an invalid character. I'm going to put in an F, and it told me, please enter a valid option. Now I'm going to enter in an R. It's telling me it's going to use the file reader and the buffered reader. Now I'm going to enter in a W. Now it's going to use the writer classes. Now I want to enter an S to use the scanner class. And it uses the scanner class to read the file. So now what I want to do is I want to create a new method that is going to read the test.txt file using the file reader and the buffered reader. So inside of my switch, when they enter in R for an option, I want to use the file reader and the buffered reader. I'm going to go ahead and invoke this method. This method currently doesn't exist. I'm going to go ahead and create it. And here's the method header. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to create the file reader object. So this is what I did to instantiate the file reader object. I have the name of the class. I have my identifier. I have the constructor. And then inside the constructor, I pass it the name of the file. Now it does have a red squiggly line because I do have to handle the file not found exception. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this with the try catch. But let's look at our imports. So at the top of file, here are all the different imports I have. I have the file class from java.io, file not found exception from java.io, and the file reader from java.io. It's important to know what package these classes live under. So for the file reader, I have to handle the file not found exception. I'm going to go ahead and do it the same way as I did for my scanner class. And this is what I did to handle the file not found exception. I simply just wrapped it with the try catch. Now the next thing I need to do is declare and instantiate my buffered reader object. And here's how I instantiate my buffered reader. I have the name of my class, my identifier, and my constructor. In my constructor, I pass it a file reader. So the reader that I declared up here is what get passed into my buffered reader. Now we're going to use the buffered reader to actually read the content of the file. Now the buffer reader does not have an iterator, so we have to do this a little different. If you type out the object reference variable for buffered reader and press dot, you can see all the methods available to you. The method that we want to use is readLine. So when we use readLine, if you hover over the red squiggly line, you'll see that we have to handle an exception. The exception we need to handle is the input-output exception. So one of the options that's available is to add another catch clause. So I'm going to click add another catch clause, and now we're handling the input-output exception. But I'm going to print out these lines instead of just printing out the stack trace. Now what I want to do is I want to use this method to read each line of the file. So I'm going to set up a while loop. My while loop is going to look different than my scanner class. Because the buffered reader does not implement the iterator interface, the while loops are going to look different. So here's what I did. I created a variable called line and I set it equal to null. Then inside my while condition, I assigned line equal to bufferedreader.readLine. Now if this value is not null, then I print out the line. So this is going to keep going until the read line is null, and then it's going to stop. The scanner class used the has next line, so this is me simulating the has next line. So once I'm done using the buffered reader and the file reader, I want to go ahead and invoke the close method. So I invoke the close method for both the buffered reader and the file reader. And what these methods do is it closes a stream that it has to that file. So it's basically giving up its connection to the file. So now that we've done this, let's go ahead and run this program. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and read the file using my scanner class. And there's me reading the file using the scanner class. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to use the file reader and the buffered reader. So I'm going to press R, and there's me using the file reader and the buffered reader to use my file. So now let's go ahead and set up the option to write to the file. So in the option to use the file writer and buffered writer, I went ahead and invoked this method called write to file using writer. I have not created this method yet, but I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I went ahead and created a method. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to instantiate an instance of the file writer class. So here's what I'm doing to create an instance of the file writer. I have the name of the class, I have my identifier, I call my constructor. In my constructor, I pass in the file name. Now there is a red squiggly line. It wants us to handle the input-output exception. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this with the try catch. Here's what I'm doing to handle the exception. I'm using try catch and I'm catching the input-output exception. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to create an instance of the buffered writer class. So this is how I create an instance of the buffered writer. I have my class name, my identifier, my constructor. In my constructor, I pass in the file writer. So this is very similar to what we did for the reader. So if you type out the object reference variable for the buffered writer and press dot, you can see all the methods that are available to you. The methods we're going to use is write and new line. So I'm going to go ahead and use the scanner class to prompt the user to enter a line that he wants to add to the file. And then once I have that line, I'm going to use the buffered writer to write that line. All right, so this is what I did. I'm using my scanner class, then I'm prompting the user to enter a new line. Then I'm storing that line into a string variable named line. I'm passing line to the buffered writer, so I'm writing it, then I'm writing it again, and then a third time. Then I'm using new line, and then I'm writing a new line. I'm saying what is going on. So we're going to look at the results of this. So what's actually going to happen is the write method is going to overwrite the content of the file. If you look at the file, this is what I currently have as a content. So when these lines are executed, all the content of that file is going to be overwritten. But let's go ahead and run this program and let's see what happens. So on this menu, I'm going to enter R so that I can read the content of the file. Then I'm going to enter W. Now I'm going to type a new line that I want to enter. I want to press enter. I want to press R again to read the content of the file. And here's the content that's currently in the file. Let's go ahead and look at the file. This is what I have. So the buffered writer kept writing to the same line. It didn't go to the next line until I used the method next line. So if I wanted to append to the file, I need to read all the content of the file and store it into a string variable. Then when I want to add a new line, I'm going to write all the previous content first. Then I'm going to append the new lines that I want to add to the file. So that's pretty much it for reading and writing to a file. If you look at the top of your file, you should see all these different classes being imported, unless you have IntelliJ set up to use the wildcard. Now, if you don't like using the wildcard, if you go to File, then go to Settings, and under Editor, go to Java, and go to Imports, change this to 999 and 999. This will prevent IntelliJ from using the wildcard whenever you're using too many classes from the same package. I prefer not using wildcard imports so that I can see the specific classes that I'm using within my program.